Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey folks, I've been scrolling through posts here for a while, always thinking I'd never have my own story to share. But life has a way of surprising you, and I've been carrying this around for months. I need to let it out. Let me just say up front, I've never been the type to jump to conclusions or assume the worst. My husband David and I have been together for 6 years, married for 4. Things were solid, or so I thought. We had the usual ups and downs, sure, but nothing that made me think, oh, there's trouble here. In fact, for most of our relationship, we were that couple, teammates through and through. We laughed at dumb inside jokes, debated over which movie to watch for hours, and had this rhythm that just worked. He'd plan elaborate date nights, and I'd surprise him with his favorite takeout after a long day. It felt effortless, like we'd figured out this whole love thing. That's why what happened next hit me like a ton of bricks. About 6 months ago, things started to shift. At first, it was little stuff you'd probably miss if you weren't paying attention. He started taking his phone everywhere, even if he was just going to the kitchen or folding laundry. Before this, his phone would just sit on the coffee table for hours, and he didn't care who picked it up. I made a joke one day, saying, "What, are you running some secret spy ring now?" He laughed it off and said, "No, work's been emailing me a lot." Okay, fine. But then, a couple of days later, he set up a password. That one caught me off guard because he'd never used one before. I casually asked him why, and he said something vague about security and hackers. I didn't push it because I didn't want to sound paranoid, but something about it just felt off. It didn't stop there. He started stepping out of the room to take calls, something he never used to do. It wasn't subtle either. His phone would ring and he'd be like, "Oh, let me just grab this real quick," and disappear into the bedroom or out onto the porch. If I asked who it was, he'd just say, "Just a friend from work." Then there was this habit he picked up of keeping his phone face down on the table. I didn't even realize it was a thing until one day I reached over to hand him something and he quickly moved his phone out of the way. It was one of those blink and you'll miss it moments, but it stuck with me. It wasn't just the phone stuff, though. He started feeling distant. Conversations that used to flow naturally now felt like I was pulling teeth. If I brought up future plans like, "Where should we go for our anniversary?" or "Do you think we should start saving for a new car?" he'd just nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before changing the subject. The day it all really clicked for me was one random Wednesday. He told me he was meeting a friend for coffee after work. It didn't sound weird. He does that sometimes. I happened to be running errands in the same area and thought, hey, why not surprise him? It'll be cute. When I got there, though, he wasn't with his friend. He was outside the cafe, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. I stayed in my car because something about the way he was talking felt serious. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I caught snippets like, "It's almost ready," and "starting fresh soon." My stomach dropped. I couldn't figure out what he meant, but it didn't sound like work stuff or friend drama. It sounded bigger than that, like something he'd been planning. When he got home later, I asked him how his coffee date went, trying to keep my tone light. He gave me this whole story about his friend venting about her boyfriend's latest screw-up. He went on about how he was giving her advice and being a good listener. I nodded along, pretending to believe him, but my brain was working overtime. Was I reading too much into this? Overthinking? Or was there something deeper going on? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something he wasn't telling me. Things carried on like that for a few more days. I started watching his behavior more closely, not because I wanted to catch him in something, but because I needed to make sense of what I'd seen and heard. Then, out of nowhere, he brought up our finances. We were having dinner one night, just a normal weekday meal. We were chatting about random stuff, his work, a new show he wanted to watch, when he said, we should really organize all our financial stuff, flashing me his most innocent smile. It was such a left-field comment that I just stared at him for a second. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "I just think we should have everything in one place, like all our account info, passwords, documents, that kind of thing, just in case of emergency." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't something we'd ever talked about before, and the timing felt weird considering everything else I'd noticed. "What kind of emergencies?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He shrugged again. "It's just smart, isn't it? What if something happens to one of us? Or what if we need to make a big financial decision quickly? His explanation made sense on the surface, but something about the way he said it put me on edge. It was too rehearsed, too neat, like he'd been waiting for the right moment to bring it up. I nodded and mumbled something like, "Yeah, I guess that's a good idea." But inside, alarm bells were going off. Why now? Why suddenly care about organizing our finances when we'd always kept things separate and loose? That night, my mind kept replaying his comment over and over, trying to piece together what it could mean. Was this just normal adult stuff and I was reading too much into it? But then I thought about the phone calls, the conversation I'd overheard at the cafe, and how distant he'd been lately. It all started to add up, and I didn't like the picture it was painting. A couple of days later, he brought it up again. We were in the kitchen. I was making a sandwich, and he was scrolling on his phone when he suddenly said, "Have you thought more about organizing the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all the account details are?" I put down the knife and turned to face him. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light but firm. "You've been bringing up the finances a lot lately. Is there something we need to talk about?" He finally looked up from his phone, surprised, like he didn't expect me to press him on it. "No, nothing's wrong," he said quickly, giving me a small laugh. "I just think it's important, that's all. You know, for emergencies." "Emergencies like what?" He shrugged, his face unreadable. "I don't know. Just life stuff. It's not a big deal, I promise. I just think it's something we should get on top of." His answer felt vague, too vague. I nodded and let it go, but the way he avoided giving a straight answer only made me more suspicious. It didn't feel like a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like he was hiding something, and I had no idea what it was. So the next day, while he was out at work, I decided to take a closer look at our financial situation. I opened our joint account online and noticed something strange. A few small transfers had been made over the past month. Nothing huge, just little amounts that didn't seem to have a clear purpose. They weren't labeled for bills or groceries or anything like that. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it looked like he'd been moving money out of the account for something. But I couldn't figure out what. I thought about confronting him, but something told me to wait. If I was wrong, I'd look paranoid, and if I was right, well, I needed to be careful. It was eating at me, so I reached out to someone I trusted, an old college buddy who happens to be a lawyer. I told him what I'd noticed, trying not to sound like I was spinning some conspiracy theory. "Look," he said after I explained everything, "I'm not saying something's definitely going on, but you're not crazy for wanting to be prepared. If you're worried about protecting your assets, now's the time to do it. Better safe than sorry." He gave me a rundown of what I could do, simple steps to make sure my finances were secure if something was going on. I'll admit, the idea of taking action like that felt extreme. It felt like I was planning for something terrible when I wasn't even sure anything was wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If he was actually up to something, and I was starting to believe he was, I needed to protect myself. It wasn't an easy decision to make, though. This wasn't just about money or assets. It was about the life we'd built together. I kept replaying memories in my head. Our wedding day, the times we stayed up late talking about our dreams, the random little jokes we shared. How did we get here? Was this really what our marriage had come to? The thought of taking these steps felt like admitting defeat, like I was officially giving up on the trust we once had. That evening, while he was out, I sat down at my desk and pulled out my laptop. My hands were shaking as I opened the browser and started going through everything. Bank accounts, investment accounts, the house deed. Each document I reviewed felt like a betrayal, but the nagging voice in my head kept reminding me that this was about survival, not sabotage. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act now, I'd regret it later. I made a list of everything I could transfer and how to do it without raising suspicion. As I typed, I felt this crushing weight settle on my chest. I'd trusted him completely for years, and now here I was, playing defense against the person I thought would always have my back. Then I called my mom. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to explain why I needed her help. "I need you to hold on to some things for me for a while. It's nothing bad, just something I need to do to protect myself, just in case." She was quiet for a moment, probably trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. "Are you okay?" Her voice was full of concern. "Yeah," I lied. "It's just a precaution. Nothing to worry about." She didn't press me, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she said, "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange mix of relief and shame. I hated involving her in this mess, but at the same time, knowing she had my back gave me some sense of stability in a situation that felt like quicksand. By the time David got home, I'd already started the process. I transferred most of my assets, our savings, my investments, even the house, into my mom's name. I left enough in our joint account to keep up appearances, but the rest was locked down. He didn't notice a thing. He came in, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I acted normal, but inside I was a mess. Part of me felt guilty, like I was betraying his trust, but another part of me felt relieved, like I was finally taking control of a situation that had been spiraling out of my hands. Over the next few days, I kept things as normal as possible. I didn't want to tip him off that anything had changed. He seemed content, even unusually cheerful at times, but instead of putting me at ease, it made me more suspicious. If he was planning something, he was doing an expert job of hiding it. What stood out, though, was that he didn't bring up the finances again. Not once after I questioned him the last time. It was like the subject had completely vanished from his mind. At first, I thought maybe I'd overreacted, and he dropped it because it really wasn't that important. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like he was avoiding it, almost like he was dreading bringing it up again after I pressed him. I caught him glancing at me a few times, quick little looks, like he was gauging my mood or deciding whether to say something. Every time I noticed, he'd immediately turn his attention back to whatever he was doing, his phone, the TV, a book. It felt like he was waiting for me to bring it up, like he didn't want to risk pushing the topic again. The silence about it only made me more uneasy. It wasn't like him to just drop something he thought was important. The way he avoided it now felt deliberate. If he was testing the waters, he wasn't getting in. And if he was waiting for something, I wasn't about to give him the green light. Whatever his next move was, I knew I needed to stay one step ahead. Something was coming. I just didn't know when or how. All I could do was prepare. That night, I made sure everything was solid. I went over the paperwork again, double-checking every detail of the asset transfers to my mom, the house, the savings, the investments. Everything was legally in her name now, locked in a trust that couldn't be contested. I even called her to confirm she had all the documentation on her end. 2 weeks went by, and things seemed normal. Too normal, actually. He was acting more affectionate, even initiating conversations about random stuff like work or what we should eat for dinner. It threw me off because for months he'd been distant, avoiding anything deeper than surface-level talk. Part of me started to wonder if I'd been overreacting all along. Maybe the weird behavior was just stress, or something I couldn't understand. But then, on a random Friday night, he sat me down on the couch, turned off the TV, and said, "We need to talk." My stomach immediately dropped. I knew what was coming before he even said it. "I think we should get a divorce," he said, his tone so calm it felt rehearsed. It wasn't angry, and it wasn't emotional. It was just cold, like he was telling me we'd run out of milk. I stared at him, unsure how to respond, as he launched into his reasoning. He talked about needing space, wanting to figure himself out, feeling like he'd lost his identity in the marriage. Standard breakup lines that didn't actually explain anything. But then he said something that hit differently. "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve more." That last part stung. It wasn't just about him wanting out. It was about him framing this like I owed him something, like all of this was my fault and he was just claiming what was rightfully his. I sat there trying to process what he was saying, but a new question kept bubbling to the surface. Why now? Then he dropped a line that made everything start to click. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," he said, not meeting my eyes. A friend. I stayed quiet, letting him talk, but my mind was racing. Who was this friend? Why were they involved in my marriage? The way he said it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone had been hyping him up, convincing him that leaving me wasn't just an option, but some kind of strategy he needed to execute. And the more he talked about how he deserved more because of his sacrifices, the more I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sacrifices? What sacrifices? He had been happy with me. Or at least that's what he always said. I'd worked hard to give him the life he wanted, and I wasn't just talking about money. When he wanted to move closer to his job, I agreed, even though it meant a longer commute for me. When he wanted to take that expensive hiking trip last year, I made sure we budgeted for it, even skipping a vacation I'd been looking forward to so he could go. I supported him when he switched careers twice, telling him it was okay to take the leap because I wanted him to be happy. I thought being a good wife meant putting him first whenever I could. And it's not like I was some inattentive, distant partner. I showed up. I remembered anniversaries and random little things he mentioned liking. I planned date nights when he said he was feeling stuck in a rut. I listened to him vent about work, his friends, his family. I didn't always get it right, but I always tried. That's what made his "I deserve more" line sting so much. I didn't buy it, not for a second. He wasn't unhappy because of anything I did or didn't do. He was unhappy because something had changed in him. Maybe it was this friend he kept bringing up. Maybe it was something else. But the person sitting in front of me now wasn't the man I married. And I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story of our marriage to suit his new narrative. I didn't press him in the moment. Instead, I nodded and said something neutral, like, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next steps." He looked surprised that I wasn't arguing or begging him to stay, but I didn't care. My focus had already shifted. I needed to know who or what was behind this sudden, calculated shift in his behavior. This wasn't just him waking up one day and deciding he wanted out. This was something bigger, and I wasn't going to let it blindside me any more than it already had. After that conversation, he went back to his apartment, and by Monday, I got the divorce papers. And let me tell you, they weren't just about ending the relationship. They were about taking everything, half the house, my savings, my investments, the car. He even threw in some vague clause about spousal support that made no sense given his solid income. It was like he was swinging for the fences, expecting me to roll over and hand him everything I'd worked for. At first, I thought it was just him being vindictive, but the way he'd framed his demands, so detailed and aggressive, made me certain there was someone coaching him through this. So I started digging. It's not like I could just ask him who he'd been talking to, so I had to get creative. I started with his social media. He hadn't blocked me, and while he didn't post often, I went through his tagged photos and comments looking for anyone new. That's when I noticed a pattern. Someone named Lily kept liking and commenting on his posts. Nothing inappropriate, just enough to make me pause. I clicked her profile and it was public. She didn't seem like much at first glance. A woman in her 30s who worked in marketing, judging by her bio. But as I scrolled through, I noticed something strange. She'd posted a photo at the same cafe I'd seen him at weeks ago, on the same day I overheard him talking about starting fresh. My stomach churned as I kept scrolling. There were more subtle hints, a comment on one of his posts saying, "You've got this," and a selfie she'd posted from what looked like his new apartment. None of it was concrete proof, but it was enough to make me suspicious. I wasn't sure what to do with this information, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for answers to fall into my lap. His mention of a friend helping him through things had stuck with me, and I needed to know if this was the friend, and what her role really was. I decided to call one of our mutual friends, Lisa. She and David had been close for years, so if anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. I kept the conversation casual at first, just asking if she'd talked to David recently, or if anything seemed off. Lisa responded quickly, saying she didn't know anything about a friend or any advice. I asked a few more questions, trying to probe gently, but she shut down the conversation defensively, saying she really couldn't help me. The whole thing felt rushed, like she was trying to avoid getting involved. Not ready to give up, I called another friend, Emily. I went through the same routine, explaining that I was just trying to make sense of everything. At first, she seemed hesitant, dodging my questions with vague answers. When I pressed her a bit more, she ended the call abruptly, leaving me more suspicious than ever. I sat there, frustrated, trying to figure out what my next move should be. Then, to my surprise, Emily called me back. She told me she needed to make sure whatever she said wouldn't get back to her. I promised it wouldn't. After a long pause, she finally told me what she knew. Apparently, David had been spending a lot of time with someone named Lily, someone he'd met through work. Emily said she didn't know much else, but from what she'd heard, Lily was deeply involved in the advice David was getting about the divorce. Hearing that name felt like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Now it was clear. This wasn't just about him needing space or finding himself. Someone else was in the picture, steering his decisions. And I was determined to find out why. I decided to confront it in my own way. That weekend, I drove to his apartment building and parked a block away, hoping to confirm what I already knew. Sure enough, a couple of hours later, he walked out of the building with Lily. They didn't hold hands or anything, but the way they walked together, close, leaning in to talk, was enough. They got into his car and drove off, leaving me sitting there, staring at the space where they'd been. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. At that moment, it was clear. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He'd been planning his exit with someone else. And now it all made sense. The sudden distance, the financial questions, the aggressive demands in the divorce papers. He wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving me with nothing, and he had someone backing him every step of the way. I went home that night, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. The betrayal stung, but what hurt more was how calculated it all was. He was using the divorce as a stepping stone for whatever life he was building with Lily, but he had no idea what I'd prepared for him. The first mediation session was tense. From the moment we walked in, his lawyer showed up with a folder so thick it looked like they were filing a lawsuit against a Fortune 500 company. He started going through David's demands like they were completely reasonable. Half the house, the savings, my investments, the car, even some additional nonsense about spousal support. I stayed quiet, pretending to listen, but I was waiting for my lawyer to make his move. When it was finally our turn, he calmly slid a stack of documents across the table and said, "Before we proceed, I think it's important for everyone to review these." David's lawyer picked up the papers, skimming through them. His confident demeanor shifted quickly as he flipped the pages, his brows furrowing deeper with each one. "What is this?" he asked, looking over at me. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into a trust under my client's mother's name," my lawyer explained, his voice steady. "The transfers were completed several weeks before the divorce filing, and the trust is fully legal and irrevocable." The room went completely silent. David's lawyer turned to him, confusion now mixed with frustration. "You didn't mention this," he said flatly. David snatched the papers from his hands and flipped through them, his face turning red. "This can't be real," he muttered, staring at the notarized signatures and dates. Then he turned to me, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury. "You planned this?" he hissed, glaring at me like I'd committed some unforgivable crime. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up to screw me over?" I didn't respond. I just sat there, letting him connect the dots on his own. His lawyer, now visibly annoyed, asked my lawyer to explain further. So he did, calmly and methodically, with every piece of proof needed to make the transfers ironclad. The dates lined up perfectly, showing I'd moved everything well before David filed. The signatures were properly notarized, and the trust was airtight. There was nothing they could do to contest it. He was livid. "You're unbelievable," he snapped, leaning forward in his chair. "I can't believe you'd do something like this to me." I still didn't say a word. What was there to say? This wasn't about me doing something to him. This was about protecting myself, because he'd made it clear he wasn't leaving quietly. The meeting ended with his lawyer muttering something about needing to reassess their approach, but it was obvious to everyone in the room that they had no moves left to make. When we walked out of the building, David pulled me aside in the hallway, his face a mix of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. "You're going to regret this." I just looked at him and said, "I already regret trusting you. That's the only regret I have." After that mediation session, things spiraled faster than I expected. He went into full meltdown mode almost immediately. It started with the calls, endless calls. At first, he sounded calm, even apologetic, leaving voicemails that started with, "I think we just need to talk," or, "I know this got messy, but we can fix it." When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. By the second day, his messages were bouncing between sobbing and screaming. One voicemail would be him crying about how he'd made a mistake and didn't want to lose everything we'd built together. The next would be an angry tirade accusing me of being stingy and vindictive, blaming me for everything going wrong in his life. I ignored it all. My lawyer had advised me not to engage, and honestly, I didn't want to. I was done playing his games. But he wasn't. When the calls and texts didn't work, he started spinning stories. I started hearing from mutual friends that he'd been telling people the divorce wasn't real, that it had all been some elaborate prank. A prank. I mean, who would even believe that? It didn't take long for the cracks in his story to show. Friends started asking questions like, "If it was a prank, why did you file actual legal paperwork?" Or, "Why hire a lawyer and make such specific demands if it wasn't serious?" When people didn't immediately buy into the prank excuse, he doubled down. He claimed it wasn't just a joke, but a way to test the strength of our relationship. He started painting himself as the victim, saying he was hurt and betrayed by my reaction, that I'd taken things too far and destroyed the trust in our marriage. At first, some people seemed to buy into his stories. I'd get these weird texts or comments from acquaintances saying things like, "Wow, I didn't realize things were so rough for him." Even his sister lashed out at me, saying, "You should have just talked it out instead of being so drastic." It was frustrating, but I knew the truth would come out eventually. And it did, thanks to one of our mutual friends. Let's call him Matt. Matt and I weren't super close, but we'd always been friendly. A couple of weeks after the mediation, he messaged me out of the blue saying he had something I needed to see. When we met up, he pulled out his phone and showed me a string of texts between David and Lily. I was confused at first. "How did you even get these?" I asked, scrolling through the messages. Matt explained that he had a mutual friend with Lily, someone who had been privy to their conversations. Apparently, this mutual friend had started feeling uneasy about how things were playing out, especially when Lily began bragging about how she was helping David secure his future. It didn't take long for that friend to connect the dots and realize what securing his future actually meant, trying to bleed me dry. Feeling guilty about staying silent, the friend took screenshots of the texts and shared them with Matt, knowing he had a better relationship with me and might be able to warn me. "This guy's been playing both sides," Matt said, shaking his head. "He's been hyping David up to take you for everything, while making him believe she'd be there for him afterward." Matt handed me the phone again. "I thought you should know. You don't deserve this." The texts were brutal. David wasn't just venting to Lily about the divorce, he was actively planning his next moves with her, and she was coaching him through it. One of the messages from him said, "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need her to agree to the terms." Lily's reply, "Don't back down. Make her feel guilty if you have to. She owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." I sat there staring at Matt's phone, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't a misunderstanding or some emotional reaction to a failing marriage. This was cold, calculated manipulation. I thanked Matt and he left, but my mind was spinning. Everything made sense now. His sudden distance, his obsession with our finances, his aggressive demands in the divorce. It had all been part of a plan, one he'd been working on with Lily behind the scenes. The texts spread quickly among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few people, and from there, they made the rounds. Suddenly, his narrative wasn't holding up anymore. People who'd been neutral or even supportive of him started pulling away. And the shift was almost instant. The people who had been defending him or staying on the fence now saw him for who he really was. Even his closest allies started distancing themselves. By the time the divorce was finalized, he had nothing but his personal belongings. His lawyer quietly dropped his case after realizing there wasn't a legal leg to stand on. All those bold demands had crumbled under the weight of the paperwork I'd prepared, and the trust I'd set up with my mom was untouchable. As for Lily, she seemed to vanish the moment things started unraveling. I wouldn't be surprised if she'd been using him just as much as he'd been using me. From what I could piece together, she'd been feeding him delusions of independence and a fresh start, but the second it became clear he wasn't walking away with anything, she was gone. Without Lily in his corner, his confidence took a nosedive. The calls and texts kept coming, but now they were more desperate. He wasn't accusing me anymore, he was begging. "Can we just talk? Please, I'll do anything to fix this," one voicemail said. Another, "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we just settle this and move on? I'll drop everything if you just talk to me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. Even his family started to pull away. His sister reached out to me at one point, apologizing for some of the things she'd said earlier when she believed his side of the story. "I didn't know what he was doing to you," she admitted. "I'm sorry I ever took his word for it." As for me, I got the house, my savings, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace of mind. My mom, as always, was my rock. She came over with buckets of paint and a list of ideas to help me reclaim the space as my own. Now life feels like it's finally mine again. No more second-guessing every little interaction, no more feeling betrayed, just peace. He's a chapter in my past, one I don't reread anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, the rest of the story is entirely mine to write.